Good afternoon. This is Chavez and Valko, your full-service immigration law firm. My name is Benjamin Hamilton. I'm a senior associate at Chavez and Valko. I supervise our employment-based immigration practice. So we talk all things employment-based immigration over here. I am with Associate Andrew Craven. Andrew, how's it going today?
Going good. How are you?
Doing awesome. Well, it is March 26th. That means we are in H-1B cap season. So this week we're going to talk some more about H-1B. But what's important about today's date, Andrew?
So yesterday at noon Eastern time, the registration closed for H-1B cap season.
So H-1B registration is over. So now today we're going to talk about, well, if I was selected, what are my next steps? Or if I wasn't selected, where do I go from here? So the first important question, when can we expect results from the H-1B lottery?
So March 31st is when USCIS plans on announcing who was selected. Your best way to find out is to log into the USCIS portal, and there it'll show who was selected. And if you weren't selected, it won't show anything.
Exactly. So if there's nothing there, that's bad news. So if you are selected, how long do you have to file?
You got 90 days, so until about the end of June.
All right. So I was selected. What is the general areas of information that my employer is going to want from me?
Your education documents and your status documents.
And obviously status applies to the people that are in the country, like on F1 OPT. So education, what are they going to need in relation to my education?
Your diplomas and transcripts.
What if I have a foreign degree?
If you have a foreign degree, then they're going to need translations of those, as well as academic evaluations showing that those are the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's.
Now, a common problem we run into, especially from the IT industry in India, is there's a lot of people there that have 3-year degrees. What do we do in that case?
So in that case, you would need an evaluation of both your education and your experience, showing that combined you have the equivalent of a U.S. 4-year bachelor's degree.
Perfect. So let's say I have a U.S. master's degree and it aligns with my position. Do I need an evaluation of my foreign bachelor's degree?
No, not as long as the master's aligns with your current position.
So if we ask this in reverse, what if I have a U.S. master's degree, which allows me to apply under the U.S. master's cap, but my U.S. master's degree doesn't align with my position, it's fine, it doesn't have to, and my foreign bachelor's is the one that aligns with my position?
In that case, you would need a translation and academic evaluation of the bachelor's that actually matches your position, showing that it's the equivalent of a U.S. bachelor's.
So one of the important things is that a U.S. master's degree gets you into the U.S. master's cap, but it doesn't actually have to be the basis of your H-1B. It doesn't have to line up with it necessarily. You can use the bachelor's as the basis of the application. Okay, so status documents. So what are the basic status documents my employer is going to need from me in order to file the H-1B?
So they would need your passport, most recent visa, I-20, and any EADs you might have.
Yeah, so basically anything proven that you were issued status to be here. But what if I have been working, like is common that someone is here working on F1 OPT?
Then they would need the EAD as well as pay stubs and your most recent W-2.
Yeah, so there's a key distinction between like having status, my I-20, or I-94 visa, and maintaining status. So if your status is work-based, you have to show that you've been maintaining it, and that's the pay stubs and W-2s, because on OPT, you can't have more than 90 days without working. And that's one of the things they're always wanting to check on. All right, so I've given all my docs to my employer, maybe filled out a questionnaire. What's kind of like the first step that the employer is going to take to get this going?
They're going to file what's called an LCA with the Department of Labor.
All right. About how long does that take?
About 7 to 10 business days.
So what are kind of like the general areas of information that go into the LCA?
Basically, the job code, area of intended employment, and the wage that's going to be paid.
So job codes, this is one we hear a lot about, and it's really important. How does my employer figure out which job code to use, and where the job code's even located?
So they're going to reference the position with the Department of Labor's ONET and basically go from there. The Department of Labor just has all these job codes lined up, and they'll look to see which one fits best with the position.
So exactly. So if you're curious, go to ONET online, go into the search bar, punch in your job title, you'll get a bunch of results, and start looking through them. The idea is to find the one that best matches your job description. So obviously, like a common one we run into is like a software developer, right? Which right now shows as the job code being 151252. Just want to kind of warn people that the ONET has been updated, but some of the corresponding sources, including the Department of Labor's Occupational Outlook Handbook and some other stuff, have not been updated and probably won't be till June. So some sources are still showing old job codes. So it can be a little confusing because you're like, wait a second, software developer over here is one thing, but over here it's different. That's kind of how it is right now. You got to figure it out. But yeah, go to ONET, find what matches. This is a simplified explanation. So if I'm looking at area of intended employment, a lot of people have multiple work locations. Like they work for multiple end clients at different location. Maybe they work for their employer at their employer location, but they also work from home. Do I have to list all of these locations?
Yes, the LCA needs to include every location that you're going to be working at.
Which takes us into our next question. How does my employer figure out what prevailing wage is going to be?
So the prevailing wage is going to be based off of, again, job code and then where you're working. So if you have multiple job locations, they're going to have to pull the prevailing wage for all those locations and then basically pick the highest one is the prevailing wage for your entire position.
So if you're going to work in Dallas and San Francisco, they're going to have to go with the prevailing wage from San Francisco because it's higher. So we're going to give you an example here. We're talking about software developers. So right now, if we go into the FLC Data Center website, again, anyone can look at this online, punch in the job code for software developers, and then we select Dallas-Fort Worth. You're going to see that the prevailing wage, there's 4 levels, the lowest being $76,000 a year, 93, 110, all the way up to 127. That being the highest. So what factors, there's 4 levels there. What factors are used in determining which of those levels we go with, level 1, 2, 3, or 4?
So what the Department of Labor looks at is your education, your experience, whether or not you have any management duties that aren't normal to the position, whether or not you have any special skill requirements.
So in terms of education, what are they looking at? Are they looking at my education, like I have a master's degree, or how are they figuring that out?
So they're going to look at what the position actually requires, not necessarily what the employee has. So for example, if the position requires a bachelor's, but the employee has a master's, that master's doesn't matter for the relevance of what that wage is actually going to be. So the Department of Labor is just going to compare what is normal for that occupation to what the employer actually requires.
So a key source here is the Department of Labor's Occupational Outlook Handbook, the OOH, right? You can look up any most occupations. They're not all there because there's some that are considered all other, and you won't find those. You'll find those in ONET, but not in the OOH. For whatever reason. Anyway, as an example, again, going back to software developer, if you look at the OOH, it says software developers usually have a bachelor's degree, typically in computer science, software engineering, or related field, and up to 2 years of experience. So if the employer requires a bachelor's degree for a software developer position, you're not going to get any bumps in the wage level. But if the employer were to require mandatory a master's, then you could get a bump in the wage level. So what about experience? How do they factor in experience when they're looking at wage levels?
I mean, it's the same sort of thing. They're going to compare what the standard level of experience is and compare that to what the position actually requires.
This is where it gets complicated. There's this thing called SVP, and there's different levels, and that's kind of what we use to figure it out, right? For a lot of H-1B positions, the sort of max amount allowed and not get a bump is 2 years. But that's, it's different for like a lawyers or positions that are higher that would require a master's. But for a lot of like the IT positions, it's 2 years. So if your employer were to require a bachelor's and 5 years of experience, that was the minimum requirement for the position, then you could get a bump in wage levels because they require extra experience. So what about special skills? Do you have any examples? I mean, I have a bunch of certifications for this and that. Is that going to give me a bump in the wage level?
So it depends. Basically, they're going to look at things like languages, if any special languages are required, or any license that's not inherent in the position. So, for example, you and I both have to have a law license for our jobs. That's not going to increase the wage level. But, if you say had an executive who was required to have a law license just because that's what a company wanted, that would be a bump in his wage level.
Yeah, so you can start looking at again, IT, and are they requiring like AWS certifications and stuff like that as mandatory for the position? That could potentially get you a bump. But yeah, like you said, if it's inherent, right? Like if you have a dentist and they need some type of dental license, that's not going to get you a bump as a special skill. And then the last one is, supervisory duties, right? So it's like, well, a good example is like, well, let's say I'm a civil engineer and there's a project and there's a bunch of contractors that I'm supervising. Is that going to give me an automatic bump?
No. So again, it's really about what is inherent to the position. So if your job would generally require you to supervise employees, such as a management position, that's not going to give it a bump. But if you're, say, a more senior software developer, and so you supervise other software developers, in that case, it would be a bump in the wage level.
Exactly. The way I like to look at it is, say, as attorneys, right? If you're supervising like paralegals and legal assistants, that's inherent to the position, shouldn't give you a bump. But if you're supervising other attorneys, then that could get you a bump. But the idea is that the attorney gathers all this information, looks at it, and kind of figures out what they think is the best job code, what the prevailing wage is going to be, and the level. Obviously, a lot of people that are applying to the H-1B cap, they're fresh out of college applying for entry-level positions. So a lot of them end up being level 1, but not always. So a couple of questions, obviously, to follow on to this is, well, so we get the LCA back, put it all together, file it. If we file it under regular processing, what's kind of like your average processing time for an H-1B?
It's kind of in the ballpark of 6 months.
And can we premium process it?
Yes. So right now you can premium process for $2,500, and for that price, USCIS will process it within 15 days.
So what are some of the common issues? So we know that under the Trump administration, requests for evidence went way up, meaning you submit the case, and rather than deny or approve it, they send a request for more information. So we saw requests go way up under the Trump administration. What are the type of things these requests are asking for? Like, what's the most common issue we see?
I think the most common was just specialty occupations, basically questioning whether or not the position required a specific degree.
And that's the key there, right? So as to qualify for the H-1B, the position has to require not only a degree, but a specific degree. And so one of the key components is, well, which job code do we select? Because going back to software developers, if we read what the Department of Labor says, it says software developers usually have a bachelor's degree. So obviously USCIS reads that to say, well, maybe 60% do, but 40% don't. And they automatically assume you're in the 40% that don't. And so they want additional proof to show that you require a degree. Some of the things we look at there are does your company have a bunch of people in the same position? And what do they all have? So is it common to the company? Can we prove that it's common to the industry? You can look at job ads from direct competitors to see what they're requiring, or we can just double down on a very, very, very detailed job description where we get, very descriptive in terms of what they're doing, and then connecting that to the education to show that it really requires it. And then of course the other one is the specific, right? That's why we hate positions like general manager, right? Because a lot of general managers, they want them to have a degree, but maybe not a specific degree. And you can run into issues where you have these positions. When you look at the Department of Labor's description, the Department of Labor's description says, oh, you can have a variety of degrees for this position. We see that and we're like, oh no, we're going to get RFE'd unless we get very detailed. What are some other issues that just come up on RFEs?
Generally they, will also question whether or not you've maintained status if you don't include your W-2s, things of that nature. They might also question whether or not the person actually qualifies for the position. Really just any number of things that went into the original petition.
Yeah, so it can be everything from, did you maintain your status? Do your educational documents, did you provide an academic evaluation? A whole variety of things that can happen. The most common, obviously, being specialty occupation. So, obviously, we wish everyone the best of luck. If anybody gets selected and they're looking for help or consultation, obviously, call or go online, book an appointment, talk to us. We can help walk you through it, kind of figure out what's going on, or sometimes just be a second opinion if that's what you need. So now we're going to move from, hey, I was selected, to I wasn't selected. So where do we go from here? So option one, I wasn't selected. What is a very common sort of fallback plan?
Generally STEM OPT. So basically getting an extra 2 years of OPT status in the U.S.
So obviously the main downside there is it's limited to STEM. So if you have a STEM degree, great. You can apply for STEM OPT. If you don't have STEM and your OPT expires, you're kind of done. But what are some key differences between STEM OPT and regular OPT?
So for STEM OPT, the employer must use E-Verify, basically showing that the employer-employee relationship is there, and this generally precludes self-employment with OPT.
Yeah, so you could be on regular OPT and hypothetically be self-employed, but then that creates an issue if you try to file a STEM extension on OPT. That's a whole other thing about, can I be self-employed on an H-1B? Typically, no, but there are ways around it in terms of, can you set up a board of directors that have, control over you and could hypothetically fire you? There are kind of ways to make it work, to be a founder or owner and get an H-1B, but it's not easy. And that's something you definitely got to talk to an attorney to figure out. All right, so let's say I'm not eligible for STEM OPT extension. What's my other option?
You can always go back to school, get another degree, or, preferably a master's degree to start opening yourself up to the master's cap next year.
I have a feeling that there are so many foreign students getting master's degrees only because they didn't get selected in the bachelor's cap. Had they been selected, they would have probably started working, but they didn't, so they went back to a master's cap. But if I go and let's say do a master's, can I get another year of OPT?
Yes, as long as your current highest level of degree is a bachelor's. So basically, to get any more OPT, your next degree has to be a level above what you had before. So bachelor's, master's, doctorate.
Well, you could start all the way down to associates too, if you really wanted to. Yeah, so it's one per level. So if you go back and get a second bachelor's, you're not going to get another year of OPT if you've already exhausted it. So STEM OPT extension, go back to school. Is there a third option?
Yeah, you could go for a J1 intern or trainee.
Yeah, well, the main catch with those are they are doable. They are kind of a bridge, right? Meaning you can do it for about a year-ish. I mean, there's a lot of exceptions there. But they do have these strict requirements, and most of them relate back to having a foreign degree. So if someone has no foreign degree, comes to the U.S. and gets the U.S. bachelor's, then doing a J might be difficult. But if they had like a foreign degree and then they came and got a U.S. bachelor's or U.S. master's, then you may be able to do a J. The other kind of catch to the J's is the employer can't sponsor it directly. It has to go through a sponsoring organization. There's a list of them. A common one we see people dealing with is the American Immigration Council. If you go to their website, they have details on the employer requirements, the employee requirements to try and do a J. How about a fourth option? Is there a fourth option out there that you can think of?
I mean, you could go for an O1, but that is much more difficult because it's reserved for what we call aliens with extraordinary ability.
So O1 is the one you may hear people talk about where they're saying, "What about I got papers and I got citations?" Well, that's the O1 typically is what they're referring to. So yeah, it's extraordinary ability. It's a very high bar. It's typically reserved for people that are at the very top of their field. We're not going to get into depth on that this time, maybe later, but the O1A has 8 requirements. The O1B has 6 requirements. You have to be able to meet 3 of the 8 or 3 of the 6. You typically see this with people who maybe went for the H-1B cap and they're like in a research program, PhD. Typically, you don't see people who are in the bachelor's cap then go try and do an O. This maybe they're doing something awesome in their home country that was unrelated. It's usually people that are like doing like we're doing heavy research, PhD level, but you never know. But it's always something that we evaluate. Any other options? Ooh, country specific options. So I'm from Mexico or Canada. Is there an option for me?
Yes. So there is the TN visa, which is a great option because there's no lottery, no real start date that's specified. You can apply for it any time of the year, but it is limited to 63 professions. And again, only folks from Canada or Mexico.
So as visas go, I guess I could say I love the TN because it is the easiest. Nothing's perfect. Nothing's 100%. But it is great. So if you have an engineering degree, any engineering degree, you don't get selected in the cap. Well, engineer is one of the categories under the TN. So if you could find someone hiring you as an engineer, if you were Mexican, you'd go apply for the visa at the U.S. Embassy or consulate abroad. If you're Canadian, you can do it at the port of entry, meaning if you were just to fly home and then cross the border back in or go through CBP at the airport, you can do it right then and there. And this can be done, like you said, at any time. They don't have to wait till October. There's actually no prevailing wage requirement. So a lot of employers love the TN because if they were to hire someone on H-1B, they may have to pay them $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. But if they hire them on the TN, they could pay them less. So there are some benefits there. Let's see, another country-specific option, Australia.
So for Australia, there is the E3, which is kind of a combo of the H-1B and TN, but just for Australian citizens.
To be honest, I have no idea how they got that special carve out, but hey, great for them. They got it, right? Yeah, it's very similar to the TN in that you don't have to worry about like a cap, like the applying under the cap and a lottery and specific start dates. Although like the H-1B, you do need to go get an LCA from the Department of Labor. The TN doesn't require that. So the E3 is an interesting option. Here's another question that we hear very common is someone's like, well, I know I was eligible for the TN, but I wanted to get the H-1B because I heard that's the only way to apply for residency. Is that true?
It's not true, but it does get complicated. The TN technically requires non-immigrant intent, whereas the H-1B allows for what's called dual intent. So it's a non-immigrant visa, but you can do the green card process. But having your employer start the process of petitioning for you as a foreign employee or, petitioning to get a foreign national to become a U.S. citizen to work for them, that's not going to preempt you from entering under the TN.
So doable. We just have to carefully manage it. So the H-1B and the L are the visas that allow dual intent. What that means is that when you go to apply for the visa, if the officer were to ask you, do you intend to apply for residency? You can say, yes, the second I get to the United States, I'm applying for residency. And it's fine. It doesn't preclude you from getting the visa. Whereas if you were to say that when you're applying for your TN, well, then they could just deny it because you're not supposed to. But if your employer does go through the green card process and we get to the point where you're ready to file for residency, if you're here on a TN, you can file for residency. Again, we just kind of have to carefully manage when you can travel, when you can't travel, and whatnot to make sure there's no issues with it. But it is doable. Obviously, the people that are on TN and really want to get to H-1B when they're applying for residency are typically people whose job requires a lot of travel, international travel. And they don't want to have to be stuck in the U.S. for 5 or 6 months during the residency process. Well, there's another option. It's based on treaties. What is it?
So if you have the funds and the entrepreneurial spirit, you can do an E2 investor and get an E2 or an E2 trade visa.
Sorry, E1 trade. Now, we're going to talk about these in much more detail. I think next week we're going to do a series on the investor visas. So tune in. But yes, these are based on trade and investment. These are largely for entrepreneurs starting their own companies, but not necessarily. It does allow for supervisors and essential employees of the same nationality, but it's not open to everybody. We actually have a list of countries with whom we have treaties, and it is open to them. Some of the people with whom we do not have treaties are like India, China, Venezuela. We ended the treaty with Iran. But for a lot of Western Europe and a lot of other countries, we have treaties. So that will be in our next series. So Andrew, do you feel like there is anything that we've missed or anything we need to discuss about the H-1B at this point?
I think at a broad level, we've covered most of it.
Well, it appears we might have a question. Oh, actually, I was looking at Facebook and Reddit, kind of looking at some general questions here, and some did pop up. Here's one question. Do I need to be in the U.S. for the lottery?
No. If you're abroad or in the U.S., you can enter the lottery. It just matters when you file the petition, you'll have to explain whether you're doing consular processing, basically coming from outside the country and entering, or if you're trying to just change your status. A lot of F1 students basically just trying to shift from being on an F1 to H-1B within the country.
Yeah, so hypothetically, you don't even need to be in the country in order for your employer to file the H-1B. It just depends how you want to do it. If you're on F1 OPT, yeah, you want to be here, file the change of status, and you keep working on your F1. Cap gap covers you from when your OPT expires to October 1st. October 1st, you're in H. Great. But if you're not here, if you're working abroad, they can still file it, select consular notification, and when it's approved, right, they send you the approval and you go apply for the visa and come in 10 days before the start date. So you don't even have to be here in order to even apply. Let's see, we got another question popping up. Let's see. Someone wants to know how many H-1B registrations and what is the probability in regular cap. Okay. Well, so far we still don't know how many registrations there were. Last year there were 274,000. My sense is that it's maybe going to go up a little bit, in large part because the barrier to entry is so low. Right? Before the employer had to put together and file the complete application on April 1st in order to get into the lottery. Now you just go online, pay $10, boom, you're in. So that means registrations are probably going to go up. Plus you see a lot of people that are doing multiple registrations under multiple employers. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was over 300,000. And if you're in the regular cap, that full 300,000 is going to be in the lottery for 65,000 slots. Right. That's everyone. That's bachelors and masters are all in that 65,000. So it's under 30%. Right. And then all the masters that don't get selected in the first go around, they get to go for the additional 20,000. So they get kind of 2 bites at the apple. So they get kind of like a under 30-30. So we don't know yet what the numbers are going to be, but if experience tells us anything, it's going to be probably between 20 and 30%. All right, then. Well, I guess that concludes our discussion of the H-1B for this week. Hey, tune into our next video. We're going to be talking about the investor and trade visas. These are just really fun, really awesome. You can do so much with them. We're going to be talking about them in depth. Just remember, if you want to schedule a consultation, go to our website. You can select a consultation online to talk to one of us. Also, please download our app. That is the Law Pilot Guardian app. You can go to our website. You can go to any of the app stores, download it. It's got tons of useful information. Base app is free. But Andrew, thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. And no problem.